Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
A very warm welcome in the second module of week 6 of the course Roadmap for Patent Creation, titled Importance of Laboratory Notebook. In this module, we will cover introduction, purpose of lab notebook, inventor's lab notebook, how to keep a lab notebook, the content of the inventor's lab notebook, how to write lab notebook, how to write observations and data in the laboratory notebook, how to write calculations and result in the lab notebook, what precautions you will take while handling the laboratory notebook, and the electronic lab notebook. Probably if you are in a what we can say the organizations or micro, small, medium enterprises, like a member of a MSME, you probably might be using a lab notebook. If you are a research scholar, probably in the lab, if your lab, the practice of lab notebook is there, then you might have using the lab notebook. But if you are not aware of that lab notebook, that what is lab notebook or how to maintain that lab notebook and how to write that thing, maybe this module will be very useful to you. What we will suggest that if we are all now the 6th, 7th and 8th module, we are completely talking about the how you are managing your research or project in a IP perspective. Now, what is the importance of lab notebook that we should understand first, then you will appreciate all these details about the lab notebook. The important thing is that we know that there is a first to file rule and there is a first to invent rule. Now, the thing is that in all over the world, the rule which is followed is the first to file, right. When there was a rule as a first to invent, at that time lab notebook was considered as a very important legal notebook to establish that 1 year timeline before the filing of the patent. That was a one aspect, but we will not go in detail because this rule is not at all in the world anywhere. Now, how this lab notebook will be useful to you? When we consider a research point of view, definitely lab notebook is a must thing, because whatever thought process goes every day, it is going on in your mind, in your what we can say, whatever you are thinking, it is better to write down note down somewhere, where what that somewhere is nothing but the lab notebook. So that what happened, that you can just visit that ideas, visit that thought process, and then you can just streamline that thing to make your research very focused, or you can get some different ideas when you visit lab notebook. We will not go in detail of that part. IP point of view, how lab notebook is important. It may become a legal document, although lab notebook is not a legal document, but it can become a important evidence to establish that you are the person who have invented that particular thing. Now, when this will be useful? By any what we can say misfortune or because of some bad luck, if there is a theft of your invention, then this lab notebook plays a very important role to establish a inventorship. Okay. So, now how you have to use it effectively. If any academic institute, what I will suggest that if your laboratory is not having lab notebook practice, or if your academic institute is not following that thing, suppose you are an engineering student and you may be in the 3rd year, 4th year and you are doing the project on some of the topic as a part of your academic activity or a curriculum, it may be a compulsory activity in the curriculum. What I suggest that if you are doing that kind of activity, at least you keep a simple notebook, not exactly what the lab notebook officially is present and all that thing. Keep a simple notebook and treat it as a lab notebook, and then maintain it. After going through this module, you will get the idea how to maintain that thing. Just follow that thing with that lab notebook, and then you keep it very carefully and keep on visiting that lab notebook in that particular time period. Suppose your project is going for 6 months or 1 year, keep on visiting that thing. Probably your research or project will be more effective and you will get what we can say the more efficient output from that activity. Okay. So, here we go how it goes, that what is that lab notebook and all that thing, one by one we will go through that. So, first point, that is a introduction. If it is not there in the if in the academic institute, if you have starting that establishment of IP cell, or you are starting to create that IP management activity in your organization, the first important thing is that you can have your own lab notebook. You can print that lab notebooks. Now, how you have to do that thing? This lab notebook, it should not be a loose leaf or a spiral notebook, right? Second important thing is it should be a serially numbered, properly numbered. Remember that it is a permanent legal record of the activities which researcher is doing. So, remember that it should be properly numbered, there should not be loose leaf or it should not be a spiral notebook. Okay? It should be hard bound proper notebook. It is useful only if it contains a sufficient information to enable someone else to reproduce the results of any experiment described in the lab notebook. So, while writing the lab notebook, what you have to do is that you have to write it when we are going to see how to write it, you have to keep that what we can say the culture. When you are establishing that culture of lab notebook, you should establish the culture that okay, you should give the guidelines how the lab notebook should be how should be written. So, you can use this module and you can define the guidelines. So, in that it is suggested that you should write everything whatever going on related to that research project, mention everything in the lab notebook. Now, this lab notebook always help inventor to avoid a dead results or ends and a repetition of errors. It is said that way, because why? Because it is expected that all negative and positive both results should be maintained or should be mentioned. Sometimes what happen, it is always in the mind of an inventor, okay, my result is not positive, I should not note that. My what we can say, the supervisor will say something, some fear might be there. So, it may be there, this kind of thing, but please note that it should not be like that. Whatever, if you are getting a negative result, please note down. If negative result is there, please note down that negative result, because that will give you the idea, oh, if I follow this particular procedure, I am not getting the result. So, you will not, or anybody who is following that lab notebook will not waste the time on that particular procedure, they will modify that procedure. So, it is always important to write down the dead ends, or if result is negative, you have to write down that thing, right. This is creating a legal record that inventor will be the first and a true inventor, just I have mentioned that thing. Okay. So, it is like a establishment of an inventorship. This document will be very useful, and it will be a very good evidence if any as I already have said, if there is a bad luck and if you have to establish that thing in the court, then obviously court will consider this as a very valid evidence. Obviously, some cautions you have to take. What that are there, we will see in this module. Okay. So, this is what we can say a brief introduction of the lab notebook. We will go in the detail. What is the purpose of lab notebook? The whole point of lab notebook is that it should say exactly what was done and when. It should make a clear who did it, right. It should enable someone else to do the same thing at a some what we can say future date, right. It should be durable and it should be a verifiable. It should cover all legal information related to the invention. When anybody is maintaining that lab notebook, as already said, that it should cover everything whatever they are related to the invention or the project or research which is going on, everything should be mentioned. So, that should be so clear that just like when we are talking about drafting a patent document, we said that that patent should be drafted in a such a way that any person who is skilled in the art, if he want to work on that particular project, he should able to repeat that particular thing just following the guidelines or the steps which are provided in the patent draft. So, similarly, when we are talking about a lab notebook, it is something a confidential thing which is maintained in that particular lab. So, you should write it perfectly without any what we can say missing any point. You should mention everything, so that if your fellow colleague or if your follower or if somebody after say 3 years, if you yourself want to follow that particular experiment, you should able to do it perfectly. So, that precisely you should write the lab notebook. Okay. So, this is the purpose of the lab notebook, that you should write it so clearly, precisely, that it will be used in a later phase for the activity. Okay. Now, the next is, what is that inventor's lab notebook? Okay. It is a permanent legal record, right. If it is maintained properly and if it is followed some guidelines, it is a permanent legal record, right. This is a legal, what we can say, this is a detailed record about what? About research, hypothesis, any propositions are there, experiments are there, thought processes are there, detailed recording of experimental procedure is there, what equipment is used, right, who are the supplier for that particular equipment, initial analysis, what is the interpretation of that experiment, what trials has been taken, right, what is the composition, whatever used for that particular thing, what are the steps which are followed, each and every minute detail whatever are there, that are mentioned in the laboratory notebook. It is designed to concentrate or focus inventor's attention on all important activities which are associated with the successful invention when the idea comes to the mind, right. So, we have already seen that one of the tool we have seen, that how the idea come, and then how the project is selected, and then how the project is what we can say followed, right. When you are doing all these things, what you have to do is that whatever ideas come, probably the thing is that sometimes you think so that the thought process goes so nicely that immediately 10-15 ideas pop up in your mind. Sometimes the day goes like, oh, nothing is working properly. But whatever the thing is there, if 10 ideas are just popping up in your mind, just note down that thing, right. Now, this lab notebook, what we can say, that it covers this complete, the basic thing is that the thought process of that inventor is there, which is present in that lab notebook, and that is a very important thing, right. Then moving further, how to keep lab notebook? You are mentioning so many important things in the lab notebook, so how you should maintain it, how you can keep that thing? Please remember, lab notebook is a property of the institute and not the person who is doing the research. So, suppose if you are an employee of the organization and you are working in the R&D department, then that organization is the owner of that lab notebook. Similarly, if you are working in the academic institute, say for example, Indian Institute of Technology, if you are a member of, if student of IIT, it is expected that when you are getting that lab notebook, when you are starting your coursework, you receive lab notebook, that practice is there, right. So, if you are getting that lab notebook, obviously it is recorded there in the organization, it is recorded while giving the lab notebook. Every lab notebook has a serial number. That serial number is recorded in the database, it is recorded, okay, this student, this number, that number lab notebook is belonging to this person, and then it is expected that when you complete that course, you should return that lab notebook to the institute, because it is a institute property. Again, the policy of the institute decide exactly what will be the procedure for that thing, what is the procedure for distribution and all kind of thing, but it is expected. Obviously, in organization it is a strict rule. Lab notebook, you cannot carry your lab notebook, you have written everything, but you cannot carry lab notebook outside the laboratory. Forget about the organization, outside the laboratory you are not allowed to take that thing, right. So, it belongs to the institute. Then it is a legal document, we have already discussed that thing, if it is a properly maintained and it is a well organized, right. The pages of the lab notebook, it should be numbered, obviously it is a numbered document, right. I mean, every page is numbered, and why that numbering is important, that because it gives you the validity, that sequential thing is mentioned, right. When you are writing that lab notebook, you are not keeping any spaces in between, means there should not be a gap in the lab notebook. You are mentioning everything serially, right, that sequentially everything is going, and that is very important to it will, then only it will act as a good evidence, right. So, you have to follow that what we can say guideline when you are writing a lab notebook. When you are receiving the lab notebook, if your institute or organization is giving you a lab notebook, obviously that will be a very good quality paper, because lab notebook at least it should what we can say sustain for 3 to 5 years minimum, right. So, because any project, if it starts, if it is in pharma industry or something like that, the project goes for 10 years, 15 years, something like that. If you are a PhD student, If you are lucky enough, your PhD will be completed in 3 years, but maybe it may extend up to the maybe 5 years or 6 years. In that case, it depends on the subject obviously, but in that case it is obviously important that the paper quality of lab notebook should be very good. Okay. The ink which you are using, you are writing that lab notebook, so you should use a proper ink. It should be a permanent ink. It should not be a water, what we can say, a solvent reactive, or it should not get a smeared out when anything falls on it or something. You should take caution while handling that lab notebook, but by mistake something falls on that thing, it should not get smeared. So you should use a good quality pen when you are mentioning something in the laboratory notebook. Okay. You should write it in a nice way. It is like whenever you are visiting after 2 years, you yourself at least should able to read that lab notebook. So in a legible manner it should be written, right. And the most important thing now, that you are writing your thought process, you are writing so many confidential things, you are writing a precise optimum composition, means conditions for that particular experiment, right, that exact temperature. You are writing the precise composition at a what we can say micro nano level also, you might be mentioning that thing. So if you are mentioning such a confidential information, the most important thing is that you should store it in a very safe place. It should not made available freely to anybody, right. So it should be kept very cautiously. It's like how you are keeping your money or checkbook, you have to keep this lab notebook at that what we can say that level you have to follow when you are maintaining that lab notebook. Then it would be less likely to be stolen or lost in the lab, in your lab, but secrecy or confidentiality, it should be mentioned carefully. It might be a physical book or it may be an electronic book. If you see the old kind of practice, if it is followed, you will find a physical books. But in the what we can say the MNCs, major organizations, whatever the Fortune 500 organizations are there, they generally use a electronic lab notebook. Nobody now uses physical laboratory book. But in an academic institute, maybe it is good if you are a PhD student, I will suggest that physical lab notebook is always better for you, so that you yourself can maintain it properly, you can carry it with you anywhere, and then you, whenever your thought process goes on, you can just write that thing, right. So either the thing is possible, it is a physical what we can say hard copy you can keep, or it may be a electronic lab notebook, right. So this is what we can say, that keeping or maintaining the lab notebook. Okay. Now moving further, the content of an inventor lab notebook, what will be there in the content. Okay. So it may be a statement of purpose or a problem of a statement of the experiment. So what the content, what content it will cover? It will cover the procedure or experimental plan. It will cover a comment on any special features. It may cover whatever the measurements are there. Then if you finish any activity that like collecting of data or something that data analysis and all that thing, then you should mention everything, that what is work, what is not able to, means where you are getting, where you are not getting the result, what else will need to be done to complete that analysis. Then it may contain a comment on any special feature of the material. So suppose you are using some material like a that specific chemical composition, and if you realize, oh, this particular component is working at this temperature in this way, and at this temperature it is working in this way. If something like that, if you realize, it is better you should mention it in your lab notebook. Perhaps there you require you will plan that then the storage and handling related things, because if once you know that thing, you will able to manage that particular thing, right. Then additional records that will support to that lab notebook will be like a photographs. If you have done the chromatography, and then chromatogram, if it is generated, you can take a photographs of that. Or if you have done the paper chromatography, you can keep that paper chromatogram directly into that lab notebook. You have to stick it properly. Then if you have run the any what we can say a computer the processes which that MetaLab and all that thing related things you have applied to your research, then the output of that thing, you can just take a printout of that and you can mention it, and you can write down the date on that thing and what date, what time you have taken that output, and then you should stick it properly. You just put it into the lab notebook, right. So that photographs, that computer pages, and anything, any photography you have done related to your project, whatever that additional things are there, you just add that, keep it there in the lab notebook. Okay. Then you can note down the, what we can say, the procedure that is of the experiment, you can put that thing. Then any test related to project invention conducted on a device, the inventor must provide the characteristic and identify the device, which exactly. So, for example, what happened, you might have the same device, 3 different devices are there. Sometimes what we can say that there are minor differences in the devices, the specification and all that thing. You should clearly mention that particular things about the device, right. Then the what we can say, the methodology which is followed, right. And then if any references are there, obviously if particular very important reference is there, just mention that in the lab notebook. Okay. So, you will cover all this thing in the content, maybe a few more other things might be there. This just indicative example I have included here. You can add up which may be very useful to you, right. And you just keep on adding that things perfectly in your laboratory notebook. Okay. So, this is about the content. Now, next, what is how you are going to write it, right. How you, is there any way to write, means we have seen that okay, there is a rule to write a patent, there is a rule to write a research paper, how to write a lab notebook. Okay. So, it is you should use a very simple direct statements. You can write down you can just frame the sentences, or you can just write a bullet points. Okay, this first, second, third point. Okay, nobody is going to check the what we can say, the language thing here. The important part here is the content, right. So, how to maintain that content in that lab notebook is a very important, right. You should not miss on content in the laboratory notebook, right. It is not necessary to repeat things here, right. So, that any introduction, problem statement, nothing you have to repeat here, right. In case of a biology related material, please do not forget to mention the culture specifications. We know that if there is a minor change also, the properties are changing. If you are procuring it from particular what we can say, culture collection center, then you should mention that particular reference number of that culture collection center which is following. So, if you want to again what we can say, order that particular culture, then you can just give that reference, right. So, properly mention that particular reference from that culture collection center, that is very important, right. So, similarly for a chemical composition also, which exactly the company brand you are using for that particular composition, right, and that specifications of that particular composition and who is a vendor, that is also important, right. You have to mention that. So, generally if you see a lab notebook, when we have designed it, what we have included is that we have kept a supplier details or vendor details. We have just dedicated that last pages of lab notebook for that thing only, right. So, that you can have a contact details of supplier, vendor, everybody, that whatever that related to our device, any device you want, that all these details or any what we can say collaborative activities are going on, then you can keep all that information in the last page of the laboratory notebook. So, you can dedicate that things there, so that it will be very handy if you have started something, if that culture is what we can say due to some reason and all that thing, if you want to order it again, if that composition you want to, or that particular chemical you want to order, immediately you can just turn the page, you can see the number, you can contact, you can place the order. That will be very easy for you, right. Then do not repeat any lab manual related things into the lab notebook. Already lab manual is there. In the lab manual, all that particular suppose instrument, how to operate that thing, that is mentioned in the lab manual. You need not to write in your lab notebook, right. Whatever you are doing, that particular thing you have to write down. No need to write down about how to run a chromatogram on a particular chromatography procedure or gas chromatography and all that thing. If that lab manual it is mentioned, need not to write it in your lab notebook, right. Then you can just thought of okay, what probably the results probably will come. So, if you are having that particular idea, you can write down that expected results in the lab notebook if possible. If any important thing if you are doing related to that activity, say for example, a particular result is out and it was like expected result, positive, negative, whatever, then at that time you just mention the time of that particular activity. right? If your experiment is lengthy, right, if it is going for what we can say overnight you are doing that thing, right, then you write down that timings, and then 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, if any specific procedures are there, you just note down all that thing, right? Measurements are very important. If there is any millimeter, centimeter, nano, micro, whatever that measurements are there, do not forget to write that units there, right? Then any necessary arithmetic, what we can say, to convert your number to the other unit, or something like that activity is there, what are the steps there are there, please mention in the lab notebook, right? Then the next, what we can say, that the conditions when you are running any experiment, right, then that particular setup you have designed for running that particular experiment, please mention. You sometimes what happen, in a hurry we say that, oh, my instrument, I just received that instrument, my slot is there, I have to finish it, I have only 2 hours, I should not waste my time in writing lab notebook, I should run the experiment, right? Please note that when you are doing that experiment, okay, you just start the setup, but immediately you mention everything whatever you have taken, because many times we know that the result, whenever you are running any particular lengthy procedures, it is not necessary that in first run you will get the result. You may have to repeat the same thing, same experiment with the different chemical compositions, or probably there might be something and you have to repeat that thing. If you have to repeat that thing, then you will require all specifications and you need not to waste time. Oh, what was the temperature, what was that chemical composition I have taken, what is that amount I have taken. You need not to waste time on that, and you need not to guess that all things, because there might be a mistake in that thing. So you have to write down that things very precisely when you are running a very lengthy experiment, lengthy or small, you should mention it properly, right? And obviously when we have talking about the ink, generally use a black ball pen, right? Ball pen is better than a, what we can say, because and a good quality ball pen, so that it will not get a, what we can say, the record will be maintained properly. Do not use a pencil for writing a lab notebook, never, okay? If by mistake, if you write something and you want to just remove that thing, you will not use a whitener, right? When you are using in a lab notebook, you will never use a whitener, just strike it out, that's it. You need not to strike it completely and all that thing, you just keep only one line, finish, right? So don't what we can say that I have to keep a lab notebook clean and all that thing, no, not necessary. If you have done mistake, just strike out that thing, right? If you are noting down any numbers and all that thing, write it very carefully, cross check that thing, right? We cannot overwrite, don't overwrite, because overwrite will lose that readability of that particular thing. So again, strike out and write it properly if you do any mistake. If any graphs, drawings are there, if loose sheets are there, affix it properly to the lab notebook, okay? If any ideas, that concepts are there, write it properly, right? Then ensure that after that, suppose some important result is out, right? Sign it properly on that page, write down the date, who have done that, and if possible, take a signature of one of the colleague in your lab, so that he will act as a witness for that thing. And then obviously take a sign of your head of that unit or a supervisor, yes. So you just take a sign, so you can have a record, okay, this result came on this date, this time, it is signed, witnessed by this fellow, and it is now signed by the supervisor also. So it becomes a very, what we can say, a proper legal, what we can say, the proof for the result, right? Then obviously I have already told you that you will not keep any blank spaces into the lab notebook. It should be a very properly written without any blank spaces. If you by mistake also, if any blank space is there, then the value of that inventor notebook will not be considered as a legal notebook. Please note that thing. So you will not keep any spaces in between in the lab notebook, right? Then it should be, obviously when you are writing, you should write a very relevant information. The unnecessary information obviously we should avoid when you are writing. Then a table of content is very important. So generally when lab notebook is there, what is there, means how it works. What we have done when we have designed the lab notebook, in the lab notebook we have made sure that there is a logo of the institute, right, watermark you can give. Then we have given that serial number compulsory, right, that serial number we have given. Next thing is that table of content. So, we can have a serial number, then that content you can write that okay, and then the page number. So, you can have whenever you want to refer that lab notebook, it will be easier if there is a table of content. And as page numbers are there, you can just mention that page numbers on the first page and what you have covered there on that first page, right. So, that gives you the easy referencing for if anything you want to just search, it will be easy for you to search, right. And you are writing obviously the date, that title obviously, and then you are putting it into that table also, right. Then we have also provided a weekly plan in that lab notebook, right. So, what we have done that after table of content or you can do it after or before, you can just design that you can give some what we can say big boxes or something like that, and you can give a calendar kind of thing, so that the fellow can or the person who is using that lab notebook can plan for a month or plan for a week, right. And that weekly planner or monthly planner, if you make it available in the lab notebook, then it will be very easy for plan the activity of the research or a project activity, right. Then what you can do that when you are writing date, it is very important to write down suppose you are writing a month, suppose it is a July month, then instead of writing a 7, if you write July, then that will be much better, right. So, if you take that kind of caution, then that will be helpful, okay. And whenever you are writing numbers, please write that date numbers, whatever the numbers are there, that you should write down it properly. Then about the drawings, generally what is there in the lab notebook, the matrix or some matrices are given, or the what we can say page like having some what we can say like a graph paper or something like that may be made available in the lab notebook, or you can give what we can say you can follow your scale and all that thing, and then you can draw the diagrams, or if any sketches are there related to apparatus and all that thing, then that drawing, that instrument related drawings can be done, right. Then what you can say that when you are drawing that any what we can say the setup, if that device is there, you are not, it is not to check your drawing, means that how good you are drawing the things. It is like okay, if you draw one box, then you should write down that one box is for this, then next another box. So, you have to just give that device setup in that way, so that you know that okay, this is like a setup of that particular thing, that you to know that you can have the drawings, okay. So, it should be a illustrative, that drawing should be illustrative, and you can draw it in the lab notebook, right. Then you will not forget to label that particular whatever the parts of that particular setup are there, right. So, that will helpful you to, if you want to set up some next time this particular experiment, you will design that particular, you will have that setup in the same way, right. Then what you will do that you will whatever, if you are using some what we can say the keywords or something like that, you should write down clearly what that phrases are for, what particular, what is the meaning of that particular thing. Means if you are using some code language and all kind of thing, mention it properly, okay, this A is for what, or this number, suppose you have used number 102, then you should clearly write down, okay, this 102 is nothing but this, right. So, that caution we will take when we are mentioning anything in the lab notebook, okay. Then the next is a graph. If you are doing, then obviously the scale is most important. Follow the rules of the graph and do that graph thing. Means most of the time if you start taking, you just write down, draw that lines and start putting on the points, and it is possible that you forget to give what is the scale you have followed. So, do not forget to give that scale, okay, when you are following the graph. If there is any error expected, that error bars, if you can include it in the starting only, then that will be good, okay. Then whatever the information related to graph is there, immediately keep it in the tabular form, so that if next time you want to draw a graph, it will be easier for you to refer that table. Instead that referring to the graph, you can immediately refer that table and you can draw the graph, and you can change the style of graph, right? There are so many varieties of graphs you can draw, right, with Excel sheet. So you can just change that style if you know the numbers properly, right? So this is what about that, what you are going to do is that how you are writing the lab notebook. Now how you are going to write a observations, or how you are going to write a data. Now the observations and results of the invention, it should include everything which happened during the experiment, right? You will not miss anything. You will not, means whatever your expectations are there, whatever you have anticipated, and what is the actual output, that everything should be there related to that observation and data. So probably when we start data collection, we have something in your mind, okay, if I will get this data, this probably might be the output, this data, this probably, but sometimes you get a very, what we can say, a different result, then that different observation is there. Then what you have to do is that you have to mention whatever is there, you have to mention it very clearly, right? This lab notebook should include the experimental observations, right, then discussion, and then conclusion. Whatever you have, you should discuss your results in detail there. So what the thing happen when you are doing actually the process, that particular process, you can give reasoning for that particular step, whatever the observation is there, whatever data you have collected, you can give the reasoning for, okay, and you can give that analysis clearly. So you can write down that in the discussion point, you should take up that important points and you should write that discussion very carefully, right? And then obviously the whatever the your whatever you are thinking, how you want to conclude that thing, right? That conclusion part, that also you should write as precisely. So suppose you do it very what we can say cautiously, if you do that thing, then when you are writing a research paper, right, or when you start thinking of, okay, after 2 years think that, okay, I can file a IP on this thing, right, this is a very good result came and now I am thinking of filing IP, then at that time this discussion conclusion part will help you to communicate with a attorney, right? Or if you are writing a research paper, then obviously when you have to write a discussion and conclusion part in the research paper, this will help you to write down the discussion and conclusion very precisely and very, what we can say, it will be very focused, right? If you have done any mistakes, right, if there are any errors, right, we have to write down that in the lab notebook, right? And you can just give that observation and that whatever the the data related to that is there, you have to mention there, right? Then any charts are there, if any tables are there, printouts are there, any pictures are there, any calculations are there, right? Or any other thing, whatever is there, that in the result, that it is the result is if it is in the any of this form, either you draw if it is possible, if it is not possible, affix it properly in the lab notebook. The most important, when you are writing a lab notebook, be honest. Whatever is there, the factual thing you have to write, right? You are not going to prove anything to anybody. You are doing the experiment. Lab notebook is for yourself, and be honest so that whatever your research is going on, it will be helpful to your research, right? Then what you can do is that, so if you are doing some experiment, it is a just tip. If you are doing some experiment and some thought process is going on, and if you think, oh, now the tea time is there, I will go for tea and then I will come and I will write down the lab notebook. Possibility is that you will miss some important point. So if any important thing is there, if important experiment is going on, better to write down that, note down that points at least in the lab notebook, and then you can take a break, because we can't believe on memory. Sometimes we we feel that, okay, it's a simple thing, right? But it may be very useful, right? So this simple thing, what you can just remember, right? Now then what we can say, that is whole, what we can say, the thought process, that observations, that data, if analysis, the discussion, whatever is that, you have written it very carefully. Moving further, then the calculations and results, right? So if the calculations are there, if repetitive same steps if you are following, just write down that one step, that one example, and then you can just give the tabular form, the results whatever are there. That is the one thing. But first time you have to write it very carefully what that calculations are there, right? Then you can summarize your result in tabular or a graphical format if possible. That will be that will save you the space in the lab notebook, and second thing is that in one look, right, it will give you a bird eye view, right. So that by seeing that result, that calculation, something may pop up in your mind, right, and it will give you like a, it may give you some idea. So whatever is that, present it in such a way that it will be very useful to you. Now what caution you should take when you are writing a lab notebook? The important thing is that if you get the lab notebook, what you have to do, check that numbers are properly mentioned there. Means first point, first thing you will see whether it is numbered or not. If numbers are properly given 1, 2, 3, if there is any, there is no missing in that giving the number, that first thing you will check. The next thing you will see that okay, proper binding is there or not, if any loose sheets are there and all that thing, you will check that thing. So that is very important thing. Then what you should do, that weekly or fortnightly you should take a signature of supervisor on your lab notebook. This is especially very useful if you are a research scholar. Then it is better to take a weekly or fortnightly signature of the supervisor. At least it will help you that how your progress is going on, that supervisor will know definitely, and this will be the record will be there, and again it will create a that legal status, it will be created because your so somebody has signed there, right. So that record is there and it will act as a legal document, right. Then next what we can say, that if though we say weekly or fortnightly you have to take the signatures, in between if there is any important entries, if any important output is there, better to take a signature, just like we have just discussed, that take a signature of your colleague and then the supervisor. Obviously we have discussed that we should write it very legibly, right, because if you want to do it, means reconstruct experimental details, or if you want to use it in a manuscript or poster or seminar presentation, you will be in a good position to read it and you will able to use it effectively. Otherwise it's a miserable condition that you are not able to read your own handwriting, then that will create a problem. So you should write it nicely, right. Then the data must be complete, incomplete data you will not keep. So that is very important, right. And sometimes what happens, there is so much data but you are not able to interpret that thing, right. Need not to worry about that thing. Research is going on. If you visit it after 6 months or 10 months or after 2 years, probably you yourself will interpret that thing. But whatever data is there, properly maintain that in the lab notebook. Okay, because what happens, sometimes if you do omit something, you think, oh, this is very simple thing, but it may be a very important thing and you may miss that thing. So maintain whatever the things, that data is there related to that particular research, mention it in the lab notebook. Okay, so that precautions you will take. So after that, what the thing is that you have seen that whatever the what different things are there, like we have started with we have seen that how that writing is there, or how you can, what precautions you are taking when you are maintaining that lab notebook, right. Then you have seen that how to write the calculations or how to write the observations and data. Then you have seen that we have seen that what content will be there, how you are going to keep that lab notebook, right. Then what is the purpose of lab notebook, what is that lab notebook is, that we have seen, right. So after going through that, what is introduction, what is purpose, what is inventor's lab notebook, what is that how to keep that thing, what is the content, how to write, what are the observations and data you are mentioning, how to write a calculations and result, what cautions you are taking. After seeing that, this is something you know now about the lab notebook. The thing is that now the practice is that electronic lab notebook is a common practice. Means especially the pharmaceuticals or the Fortune 500 companies or the MNCs, they generally use a electronic lab notebook. Now why this is important, because you just imagine that R&D is there, person is working, right, and mostly what the thing is happening, that R&D departments are like not on a one place. They are maybe in one R&D is going on in India, then another maybe in China, another maybe US, and then the coordination, if that what we can say, for easy coordination, what exactly going on at what places, that electronic lab notebooks will be very important, and that is very useful actually. So if any group is working on that particular thing, that electronic lab notebooks definitely help that to do that particular experiment. So most of the corporates now follow the most of them use a electronic lab notebook, right? And they themselves have devised that thing, or there are some what we can say organizations that which sell that software of the lab notebook, right, that electronic lab notebook. Now the benefit is that already I have seen that whatever the things you are following in that physical lab notebook, all things you have to follow when you are maintaining the electronic lab notebook. The advantage is that sometimes you get a added advantage of electronic lab notebook is that some hints, some what we can say the organized way, if it is a very properly designed lab notebook is there, electronic lab notebook is there, then that is so organized, drop down menu is available, so that you can mention, you automatically go on mentioning the things very carefully, and there will be none of the point is missed out in that kind of what we can say if electronic lab notebook is there. And you know that pharmaceutical companies, that research when it starts, it goes 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, the person is that the group is working on that thing. So in that case electronic lab notebook makes a sense actually, right. So that is used very easily, and then retrieval of data, and then you can use a metadata, you can do the retrieval of data, and all that kind of thing is possible when it is in a electronic form. It is like a virtual lab notebook, right, and in which what we can say, in short we can say that it is like a scan of the whatever is going on, that inventor's mind, it is completely written there, and that available to the group who are working on that thing. Sometimes the person can write down, it is in the on the page, and that pages can be uploaded on the lab notebook, that electronic lab notebook, or it can be emailed and all that thing. That all facilities are generally available if that electronic lab notebooks are purchased from the that what we can say the organizations which are supplying that kind of softwares. So this is what the electronic lab notebook is there, right. Now after going through this details of a lab notebook, probably you might not have thought that okay, this lab notebook is such an important tool, and there are so many rules and that tips are there how to maintain that lab notebook, right. So we have just gone through all the things which are done when you are maintaining that lab notebook. It is always good practice to have a lab notebook, because it keeps you on a track when you are doing a research or any project. So what I will suggest that we have it is a very important tool, and we are now doing that research, right. That we are planning that research, or we are planning the project, right. So you have done some activity related to project. Now you are very clear on your domain, right. You have done the keyword search also, then you have retrieved the patent documents also related to that. Then in one of then now what you can do is that you just if in the organization, if your organization you are following lab notebook practice, well and good. But if you are not following that thing, what I can suggest is that just buy, if you are a student, you just buy that hard bound proper notebook from the market. You yourself number it properly. You yourself create a table of content on the first page, right. Just 3 columns you can do. That serial number, that content, whatever you want to mention, the title and the page number. Just make a 3 points there, right. Then create a boxes for the weekly planner or a monthly planner. That is a first part you just create. On the last part you just create a table, right, where you can write down, you just write down vendor or supplier or collaborator. You just give title like this thing and mention the mobile number or address, both things. That will be very useful if you want to do any communication with them, right, email ID. So that things you can mention. And then what the practice you have to do, if you have already working on the project, or if you are working on a research, every day without fail you will write down that lab notebook. Whatever the thought process is going on related to that work, you will immediately mention When you are writing, obviously you will follow the rules, nice pen, that is ink should be good and all kind of thing. Obviously when you are buying that book, you will check that paper quality and all that thing that you will do now, as we have just now seen that how it should be done. But what you will do now, that you will not forget to write down a date. You will write down date wise whatever you have done the activity, write down in a bullet form, but you start writing lab notebook, right. So that suppose you have done the activity of retrieving the patent, you will do that thing, or in the next, whenever you are following this now course, you will may probably we will give you so many activities now. So whatever that activities you are doing, you just mention it in this lab notebook. Okay. So you can just this activity immediately after going through this module. Okay. Now this after going through this complete details of a lab notebook, please watch this video, okay, just related to this lab notebook.
Did you know that the objects that I'm holding in my hands could make me rich? Well, you probably know about the lottery ticket, but the lab book? Why is it so valuable? Now, the lab book is valuable because it holds new ideas and procedures. Now, we all know that new ideas can be valuable. They can base new inventions that can be the subjects for patents, and patents can be worth millions of dollars. But those ideas are only worthwhile if they've been properly documented. And that's why the laboratory notebook becomes so important. In some laboratories, particularly basic science laboratories, the lab notebook is typically the primary document that is used to keep records of things that happen. However, the poor laboratory notebook gets a lot less attention than it deserves. In many labs, the laboratory notebook becomes a disorganized collection of jottings and personal annotations that certainly bears no resemblance to an organized record. It becomes a kind of a personal diary for the person who is writing in it. But this kind of a practice is dangerous. The laboratory notebook will be the document that is pulled if there is ever any question of ownership of intellectual property. In a medical products environment, in a company, the laboratory notebook is especially important because many of its results may base the development of products that will be used in humans later. Let's think of a situation where you put together a new chemical compound. Now, you don't think much of it at the time, but you note the results in your laboratory notebook. Now, let's look later, several years later, and you find that that compound is now worth millions of dollars. But you have a competitor, and that competitor says that you didn't invent that drug first, I did. So the laboratory notebook is going to be the key piece of data that is used when people try to understand who was the first inventor. And remember, in the US, in patent law, the first to invent is the person who is eventually going to be the owner of the patent. So now let's look at your laboratory notebook in this new light.
With this, we come to the end of this session on the importance of lab notebook. In the next session, in which the title of that next module is in which technical category my invention falls, that is IPC, that is International Patent Classification. So, we will learn about what is that International Patent Classification is and how it is useful and how we can use it effectively for our research. See you in the next session. Thank you.